Today we're going to put some pollen traps on the beehives. The pollen the bees collect from the flowers, they attach it on their legs in what's called their pollen baskets. It's little hairs that the pollen clings to. They mix a little bit of nectar with it and make it into the little balls, and then bring it into the hive, as you can see when they're flying into the entrance here. This frame shows the bee pollen that the bees have stored into the comb, and they collect the pollen from the flowers just as they do the nectar, and it is the first food for the baby bees. It's high in nutrients and protein. It's like about 35% protein. What you see on top is just honey that's capped over. The pollen, they never do put a wax cap over it like they do the honey. The pollen trap. Now these are made with a screen that's just big enough for a bee to fit through. But as he squeezes through and his hind legs are coming through, it'll knock the pollen off through this smaller screen that the bee can't fit through into a little drawer where we can collect it. The trap goes on the entrance of the hive, so the bees have to go through it, and it has to be the only way they can get in and out the hive, or else they'll go around it and find some other way. We're going to put one on this hive. So first, because I see that this hive has a little groove in the bottom board here, that the bees would just use that to go under the trap, I'm going to tape it off with some duct tape to block it up. And I'll give the bees a little puff of smoke so they don't come out to defend their hives. Okay, and then the pollen trap is made to fit right in the front here. And there's different ways to attach it. Before I would put screws through the hole on a little board that I'd screw to the hive, but I found out it's just quicker and easier to use the tape and tape it to the hive. I want to make sure that everything's fit tight with no gaps. I'll reinforce this a bit so that it doesn't come off when it's softened up in the sun. Now I'll also need to reinforce the sides, because they'll often try to get around it and succeed. The little flap that the bees go through is made so that you can open it in case it's going to be a few rainy days and you don't want to have them collecting pollen, because the moisture will condense in there and just ruin the pollen. But the force of the bees as they're all coming out, they can open that on their own. So I'm just going to put a little piece of tape that will tape that flap of screen shut. And then if I need to open it, I just take off the tape. Otherwise, I'll come out to empty the trap and I'll find that they pushed it open and they've been coming in and out, not leaving any pollen. And I've also found from experience that these drawers can pretty easily slide open a bit, and then the bees will actually go inside there and be trying to pick up that pollen. So I'll put a little piece of tape there too to close that. Keep that closed tight. Now it takes a little while for the bees to get used to coming in and out the pollen trap, but they can do it without any problem. When you start trapping pollen and the hive is getting less pollen to store inside, they get some through, but not the majority of it, but they'll just make more bees be pollen collectors and collect more pollen so that they have enough too. And you just don't leave a trap on a hive indefinitely for the whole season. I give it time without a trap to also store up a bunch of pollen too. The best time to trap the pollen is in the spring, when there's a lot of pollen being collected and a lot of flowers available for them. As you can see, that bee's landing there and going to figure out how to go in and out. The ones inside that aren't coming out yet, they've got to figure out how to climb through to come out. Okay, here's the bees trying to learn how to go through the trap. And one thing I learned from experience that is good to do is to put some blocks underneath here, because so many end up just going underneath it. Now this will help the bees that land, instead of being and crawling under the trap to try to find out how to get in, they can land on this board and then just climb right up into the trap, and that'll help them learn how to get in and out of there, which in a couple days they'll have it figured out, because bees are pretty smart. Okay, we'll also put a trap on this next hive here, and it's kind of setting low down on the ground there, so to make it more convenient for emptying the trap every day or so, I'm going to put it up on these blocks and raise it up. You never want your hive where the front is higher than the back, because then when it rains, the water lands against the front and on the board and actually will go into the hive. Hives can actually drown out if you get a good downpour or a lot of rain. The whole bottom can actually fill with water and plug up the entrance and kill out the hive. So you always want a slight tilt forward, though you want it basically level. All right. So I've already taped this flat shut on this one so that the bees won't push it open on their own. And I'll put that piece on the drawer so it won't come open like they frequently do. And when I want to empty the drawer, I just peel off the tape. One thing about the pollen traps is when bees do their house cleaning, they take everything and just throw it out the front. So if you've just recently put on new boxes that the bees need to clean out, or they're just getting into a box they haven't been into like over winter, you don't want to put a trap on it that time, or else you're going to not only get the pollen in it, but all the debris that the bees clean out of the hive. These boxes have been on for several days and the bees have done all their preliminary house cleaning, so they're ready for the traps. This is the evening of the next day, and I'm going to empty the pollen traps. And this will be what they've collected in one day's time. To start with, I'll puff a little bit of smoke into the entrance of the traps to drive any bees in. I like to empty them in the evenings because there's not as many bees flying in and out as there is in the day when they're out working. This one doesn't have as many bees as the other two, and so there's not a whole lot of pollen in this one. Okay, we'll see how the next one did. Quite a bit more in this one. There's a bee or two that got in there to shoo out. Our climate here is pretty moist, and so I like to empty them every day so that the dew doesn't make the pollen wet and clumpy. When the bees are in a drier climate and use a larger kind of pollen trap, you can go even like a week between emptying them and the pollen will be just fine. The tray is ventilated so the air can circulate around it. It's a little smoked because they are getting a little disturbed there. Okay, this hive has a lot more bees and more of them that are hanging around in the trap. And quite a bit more pollen. And bees on the back of the trap that I need to brush off and not get in. Now that one had just as much as the other two combined. Pollen can be practically any color, all the way from near black to a creamy, almost white. Predominant colors are usually the orange, like you see here, or yellow. From watching the bees work, the orange here is mostly poison oak pollen, but they're starting to bring in blackberry pollen, which has that grayish lavender color. In another month's time, when I'm taking off pollen, it'll be pretty much all that gray lavender color instead of the orange color. There's some that are like a darker orange, which are from other flowers, kind of a light yellow. Those are flowers that just aren't in as much abundance, but that the bees still like to work. The pollen traps I'll just leave on for probably about a month. When the bees are really busy and the honey flow is going on, it obstructs their entrance to go through the pollen trap, and then they're concentrating more on nectar and not gathering as much pollen anyway. So that's the way that bee pollen is collected, and the best way to store it is just to put it in the freezer, and it keeps it really fresh and it stays good for a whole year.